Welcome to another Killick Explains video, and it won't surprise you to find out that this is going to include another poll. Now this time the question I asked was, what do you fear most? Well, let's narrow it down a bit more because that leaves quite a few options open, I suspect. What do you fear most about life after work? Now, before people who are nowhere near life after work switch off, it is something that everybody should give some thought to. Whether indeed life after work is years or decades away, whether it's approaching quickly, or whether in fact you're in it. It is one of the biggest phases of life. It can last anywhere up to 30, 40 years, possibly even more in a few fortunate cases. So it is a phase of life that shouldn't be simply dismissed as an irrelevance when you are in work. So the poll question was basically that: what worries you most about stopping work? And I offered various answers, so let's run through the poll results first of all, and then some comments to follow as usual. So possible answers, and you may be able to think of others. I will miss my colleagues. That accounted for 4.7% of the votes cast. Then I offered, I will miss the status that comes with my job, and that was just 5.9%. More about that in a moment. Then a bigger chunk of the votes, 24.7% of you decided the answer was not having enough to do. And finally, the whoppingly largest answer, 64.7% of the total votes, so the clear winner, running out of money. Now, quite clearly you can only pick one out of four answers, and I suspect for some people the answer is actually nuanced, that more than one would fit the bill. Some people said to me, I'd like to answer all of the above if I could. But let's run through these and just consider one or two of the implications and what we should be doing about it and thinking about longer term. So missing colleagues, 4.7%, quite low, and I suspect given a chance a lot more people would have ticked that box. But in fairness, those people who are self-employed or contract into companies, which is an increasing number of people these days, won't necessarily say I've got regular colleagues per se. Young people caught by the recent pandemic may not have had a chance to build up anything they could call a colleague relationship other than over Zoom. So there are various reasons why perhaps it scored down quite low on this particular poll result. But I'd suggest that actually for a lot of people, even if it wasn't their top answer, building a network at work, some people even meet their long-term partners at work, is quite an important part of being full-time employed, even if it's clearly not such an important part of being self-employed or possibly running your own business or contracting your services into a variety of businesses. Now, answer number two, again, only attracted 5.9% of the votes, and that was loss of status. But actually this can be quite a big one, and psychologists do spend quite a lot of time thinking about it. At work, especially if you're in a senior position towards the end of your working career, if you like, a lot of people do have a big infrastructure around them, EAs, PAs, lots of people reporting to them, lots of power, lots of responsibility, lots of respect, hopefully a big budget, and so on. And actually in the old days, and it can still happen, where essentially you finish work full-time on a particular day, collected your carriage clock and your sort of pension kicked in, that loss of status for some people can be quite difficult to deal with. All of a sudden they're at home, yes, following their long-standing interests and hobbies, spending more time with friends and family, travelling and so on, but actually they can miss the infrastructure that comes with work more than perhaps they first thought. So I put it in there just as something to bear in mind and something perhaps to prepare for. Now answer three was not having enough to do. That was 24.7% of the total votes. And this can actually be more of a problem than it sounds. A lot of people might be watching this and thinking, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, there's loads to do. There's travel, there's friends and family, there's pursuing those long-term interests, which were just weekend hobbies when I had work to worry about. But actually, a colleague of mine who did retire reasonably recently put it this way. He said, if you haven't cultivated many interests outside of work while you were working, don't assume you will mysteriously cultivate them the moment you stop. In other words, people should put time and effort into thinking about how they will use what could be decades after work. It's no longer the case that retirements are relatively short. They can last an awful long time, and a 7-day week has a lot of hours in it if you're not working. And that's probably part of the reason why some people don't plan to completely stop work, assuming that's an option for them. They don't like the look of the cliff edge. They don't want to dial down from very busy to almost nothing. But in order to make that graduated step down, if you like, into part-time work, into consultancy, into some smaller version of your previous role, you do need to think well ahead of time about how much career runway you have. Because some employers structure jobs to be what I call binary, all or nothing, even in this post-pandemic world. In other jobs, there is a lot more flexibility. So if you want the ability to dial down, it's something to think about many years before you actually have to do it. Now, running out of money, that was by far the most popular answer, if that's the right way to put it. 64.7% of people who responded said that. So let's think about that one. We're all living longer on average than we used to. We all have more opportunity than we used to. I mean, life in work and after work presents huge opportunities to travel, to take up new interests, to move property and so on. And many of those were curtailed during the pandemic. So that's accelerated people's desire to do all those things. But money clearly is going to be the main concern. Will I run out? Let's have a think about this. Some of the things that people should be doing before they stop work, they should definitely carry on doing once they dial down work or give it up altogether. And one of those is budgeting. And here's some good news. There are some benefits to life after work. I mean, people generally are not spending as much money as they were on things like commuting, work clothes, work lunches, beers after work, and so on. So actually there are a number of savings to make. There are some benefits too in terms of allowances and credits. Personal allowances tend to rise with age, for example. There are 1 or 2 national insurance benefits of being retired and so on. So actually people want to think carefully about how to maximise their income and also benefit from lower outgoings. So budgeting remains important as ever. And as does planning. Think about what your life after work will look like. For some people it's expensive to start with because they want to do lots of catch-up travelling, for example. Then they're spending plateaus, if you like, when they get into a sort of routine, a rhythm of life after work, and then it accelerates again once, for example, care costs kick in potentially. So it's important to think about what sort of pattern you will have in retirement in terms of lifestyle, because that will drive to some extent the speed with which you use up the resources you've saved. Now let's think about that. Life after work can be funded a number of ways. So what are the ways you can effectively boost the pot available to you? One of them is to defer retiring. State benefits, for example, tend to increase with time if you don't draw on them. That's often true with certain types of pension arrangement too. And those people who've built up a money purchase or defined contribution scheme, as it's called, could carry on contributing. So you get a double whammy here. If you can carry on earning an income and not drawing down on your pension pot, then that is one way to make sure that it lasts a bit longer once you finally need it. And in the meantime, there is a thing called salary sacrifice for those people who are employed and whose employers offer it, which allows you effectively to give up some of your gross salary in return for a pension contribution. And that can be quite tax effective too. And then I would say other ways to think about making your money last once you stop work are to think about how drawdown is going to work. In the old days, you had very little choice. You had to kind of hand over 3/4 of the amount you'd saved to buy an annuity, an income stream as it's called. Those days are gone. So people now can manage their own retirement pot and draw down on it, as it's called, at the appropriate rate. And the art, which is easier to say than to do, is to not leave too much behind. I mean, after all, if you've worked hard, you want to enjoy life after work, but also not to run out of money. And a conversation with an advisor can help you to work out what the appropriate drawdown rate will be, taking account of potential future expenditure plans, moving house, for example, paying for weddings further down the family tree and so on, taking account of those, and also making sure that there is enough left to see you through the whole phase of life after work. And in fact, one of my guides, which is free, doesn't require any conversations with anybody, covers exactly that problem of generating an income after work. So there you have it. Just to run through those again, I suspect for a lot of people it was difficult to make one single choice because yes, missing colleagues is potentially an issue, so do think about how you would replace that network if you are somebody who's, say, within a decade of stopping work. Loss of status, there's not a whole lot people can do about that, although there are other ways, of course, to acquire status and meaning outside of work. Not having enough to do, well, that's a function of the kind of person you are and what sort of hobbies and interests you've built up. Don't reckon to spend your whole life after work travelling. It's expensive and can get a bit repetitive. Don't necessarily assume you'll buy that vineyard because they can be expensive and difficult to look after. But running out of money, I suspect for most people, is number one. Now, for those who'd like to find out more about this whole topic, there is my video library available at killick.com/learn. And if you'd like a copy of the guide I mentioned, which is all about generating an income after work, so deals with the various sources of income and looks at drawdown in a bit more detail, then do please ping us an email at editor@killick.com.